Welcome to Into the Sky, a podcast about the iconic Avro Vulcan XH558. I'm Martin Price, and this is Season 2, where you'll hear from people close to XH558, from pilots who have flown her, to the volunteers who look after her, and the team who are in charge of securing her future. Join us as we explore the history of this magnificent aircraft and learn about how she will inspire the next generation of engineers through STEM education. Look into the past to improve the future.
Joining us on today's episode is a gent with a true understanding and passion for the Vulcan, a gentleman who has done some amazing things with this aircraft, now a volunteer at the Vulcan to the Sky Trust. Here with us is retired Wing Commander Adrian Sumner, who has agreed to tell us his remarkable journey with the Vulcan over the years in the RAF and why it is so important to preserve this remarkable aircraft and its heritage. Hello, Adrian.
Oh, hello, Marty.
So, Adrian, you've had a very long career in the RAF. You've done some amazing things, but would you mind telling us about when you first saw the Vulcan, please?
Yes, well, being a Kentish man, I was born in Gravesend, and I used to go along to Biggin Hill for the Battle of Britain Open Days in the late 1950s. Yes, I am that old. And it was there that I first saw the Vulcan flying. A number of years we went one after the other. It might have instilled some passion in me. I don't know, but it was certainly a sight to see in those days, and I remember it very well. But of course, you can't just join the Air Force, become a Vulcan pilot. So what I did was I left school at 18 and joined the Air Force straight away. I joined on what they called a direct entry commission, Type A, and that was to my 38th birthday or 16 years of service. And I went down to a place called South Cerney, after I'd done the aptitude tests at Biggin Hill, that is. And then from South Cerney, I became an officer, but I'd never flown an aircraft. So what they did, after I passed out of South Cerney as an acting pilot officer in 1967, I then went to Church Fenton, which is up near York, for 30 hours on the Chipmunk to see whether I could actually fly aeroplanes. And from there, I went to the Jet Provost. I obviously succeeded there and went to the Jet Provost at Leeming, which is up on the A1, a bit further north, as you know, up by Harrogate. And I did 150 hours on Jet Provost up there. And it's there that I got my wings. And coincidentally, and there's a number of coincidences, I think, through my career, that the person that gave me my wings was a chap called, his nickname was Cyclops Brown. He was an Air Commodore who only had one eye. The story is he used to fly with the co-pilot also, and he had one eye, so they had two eyes between them. But anyway, I found out latterly that he was station commander at Waddington, was an ex-Vulcan pilot. And I didn't know that till quite a bit later on. In fact, only in the last few years I found that out. But from Leeming, I went down to a place called Oakington, which is down near Huntingdon, and did about 80 hours on the Varsity. And that's a twin-piston aircraft, the Vickers Varsity. And from there, I had to make the decision on which aircraft I wanted to fly. In my day, if you went multi-engine, and I was obviously on the multi-engine track at that stage, you stayed multi-engine. And so at the end of the course, they came up with all these wonderful aircraft that you could go on to, the Hercules, the VC-10, and the V-Force, the Victor and the Vulcan. And I thought I'll be different. I'll go for the Vulcan because I'll probably get my first choice. If I went for the Hercules, I probably wouldn't get it. So I went for the Vulcan, and the rest, as they say, is history. But from there, it wasn't straightforward. I had to wait another year before I could get a course. And so luckily, I had a holding position on the Varsity itself over at RAF Watton, which was in Norfolk in those days. And half the tour, half of 1969 I spent there. The rest, I then moved across to Cottesmore. And coincidentally, of course, why was Cottesmore empty? Because the Vulcans have moved out of there and they'd gone to Cyprus. So it was me sort of almost following the Vulcan around, unbeknown at that stage. And then in 1970, I finally got my course at Scampton, the OCU. There, and then they moved across from Finningley in 1969 but they'd left the simulator back at Fittingley. So I had to do the simulator at Fittingley and then the rest of the flying course over at Scampton. My course over there had 3 crews on it. 2 were going to Cyprus to replace those crews that initially went from Cottesmore out to Cyprus, and they come to the end of their time there. So we were the fresh crews going out to replace them. And one was staying at Scampton. Luckily, the new boss of 9 Squadron chose me as his co-pilot, and that was really fantastic from my point of view. So eventually, after 4 years of training, I was posted to my first operational aircraft, and that's in RAF Akrotiri on 9 Squadron in Cyprus.
Oh, nice. That's a nice posting to be having.
It certainly was. I had a year there unaccompanied, and then I came back and married my current wife. So we've been married 53 years this year. And it's easy, if you get married on a 0, 1970, then it's easy to work out your number of years, because everybody asks, how long have you been married? She came out and enjoyed it, but she then became a follower, of course, and she was a teacher, and it's very difficult to get jobs when you're moving every 3 years through the Air Force, but that's another story.
So you're posted to Cyprus. You was out there for, how many years were you at Cyprus? Do you say 3 years?
No, I was only there 2 years, in fact. The reason for that was, certain factors. There was a wonderful trip from there, of course, being the boss's co-pilot. I used to obviously follow him around and go where he wanted to go. And we had this opportunity to go to New Zealand. So we actually took a Vulcan down to New Zealand while I was there. And so that gave me a lot of experience that I wouldn't have otherwise had of flying to all these foreign countries, or through the foreign countries, a number of them. Whether it's because of that, whether it's because he liked me, but I actually got accelerated promotion to flight lieutenant. And that helped. And so, and that he obviously thought and gave me good write-ups, the fact that I ended up going back to get my own crew as a Vulcan captain at the age of 24. I went back only after 2 years.
Right.
So that actually was great from my point of view, but leaving Cyprus was quite hard.
I can imagine that, yeah. So, as you just mentioned, you went back to Waddington, you're 24-year-old, you've got your own crew by now. Wasn't this another time when you did another one of those amazing things with the Vulcan as well? Probably another one that really sticks out in your mind.
I don't know what the attraction was, but I seemed to pick up wing commanders, bosses. As I say, I was the boss's co-pilot on 9 Squadron, but when I got my own crew, I went through the OCU, arrived on 44 Squadron at Waddington, and there was a bit of a change around, and the new boss there, actually came as my radar. So I had my boss in the back of my aircraft. Now that has its pluses and minuses, of course, as you can imagine. Airborne, I'm the boss, and on the ground, he's the boss. But of course, things could get a little hot under the collar if you're not careful. But it did work from my perspective, in that there was this opportunity. We still, in those days, we're talking about the early 70s, we still had a commitment to the Far East. And this was post the Malaysian conflict and the Indonesian confrontation. And it was called Exercise Sunflower. So what it meant was we could travel out to Singapore, Tengah in Singapore, and to reinforce at a moment's notice. And to get there, of course, you could fly either west about or east about out to there. And what we had were staging posts around the world where there was RAF personnel. That's both west about and east about. So on the west about, it was Canada and America, and then out to Hawaii, out to Wake Island in the middle of the Pacific, Guam, and then down to Singapore. Or you go east about to Cyprus, down to Madeira in the Arabian Sea, out to Gan in the Maldives, and then out to Singapore. But each of those staging posts had RAF personnel, as I say. We can talk about a little bit about one of those later on, because I ended up on one of them. But this trip was basically, we went out west about. Boss decided to go west about, and we flew out to Singapore. We actually went via Darwin in Australia on the way to Singapore from Guam, because they had some 1,000-pounders there, which were Timex. So we dropped a few 1,000-pounders on the range out there before we went up to Singapore. Having the boss on my crew, he suddenly decided that he wanted to go to Hong Kong whilst we were there. So I said, well, I couldn't refuse that. But that wasn't easy to do because you couldn't just go to Hong Kong in those days, because RAF Kai Tak was on the main international airport. And whether you know, the approach into one of the approaches was called the checkerboard approach. And it was thought to be quite difficult for large aircraft because there was a right-angled turn at about 600 feet before you actually got onto the final approach. And the RAF had this thing that you had to go up on the flight deck of another aircraft to see the approach before you were allowed to go up there. So I had to do that. I went up on a VC-10. I saw the approach. I came back to Singapore, and then we flew up there for the weekend and had a jolly good weekend and came away. The thing was, we didn't do the checkerboard approach. We landed on the other end and we took off the other way out to sea. But you never know with these things which way the winds are going to blow in your favour or not in your favour. And then from Singapore, because I had the boss on my crew, I suppose, he said he wanted to go all the way around. And so in the end, we ended up flying back to UK, the reverse, to Gang, to Madeira, to Cyprus, Akrotiri, and back to Waddington. And the total number of hours, although it doesn't reflect too much, it was just over 65 hours, I think we did on that whole trip around the world. The aircraft, incidentally, is the one at Cosford, which is in the Cold War Museum. It's called X558. Mm-hmm. I like to think it's there because I did that trip and it's my aeroplane. But that's not the case. It was the primary aircraft for the Falklands War. It's the aircraft that famously they couldn't pressurize because it had a problem with the DV window, the direct vision window. And so it then became the spare for all the missions on the Falklands, in the Falklands War. So that's why it's in the museum. But I have obviously fond memories of flying it around the world. At the end of that tour, I went away to become a qualified flying instructor at Little Rissington, the home of Central Flying School. So I actually left the V-Force to go and do that. It wasn't unusual for people to go away and become a flying instructor in those days. Having got that qualification, I didn't go straight back to the Vulcan. I went up to one of the University Air Squadrons. In fact, Glasgow University Air Squadron was called UGSAS, the University of Glasgow and Strathclyde Air Squadron, where we flew from Glasgow Airport, Abbottsinch, in the Border. And that's what I trained on as a QFI. So I instructed there for a couple of years. But during that time, I got promoted. And they were obviously wanting to look for flight commanders back in the V-Force. So I got sucked back from there, back to Waddington. And that's when I went back to Waddington on 50 Squadron as a squadron leader.
Yeah, okay. And it was whilst you were back at Waddington that I believe you ended up doing something else, which was quite spectacular with the Vulcan as well.
In those days, it was interesting that each squadron had their own display pilot or display crew. Because I at that stage I had over 2,000 hours on the aircraft, and I had the experience of doing all sorts of things with it, as I've sort of iterated, that I was chosen to do the 1980 display season with my crew. And each display crew as well were lucky enough to get an overseas display as well as displaying around the UK. So I did things like the Church Fenton display at home here during that year. Mm-hmm. And the overseas we got was a place called Portage la Prairie. And you're going to say, where's Portage la Prairie?
Absolutely, yes. Where is it?
It's about 100 miles straight west of Winnipeg, right in the middle of in Canada. I think it was a grass airfield. We certainly couldn't land there anyway. So we had to base ourselves at Winnipeg and go and fly and do the display over at Portage. Then we landed back at Winnipeg. And then, of course, you wanted the after show sort of entertainment, and they wanted us back to say hi. So we actually then drove back to Portage in a straight line, and then back to Winnipeg afterwards. So It was quite a mammoth task, but we did it, and we thoroughly enjoyed the time in Canada. But that crew, it does show how the crew system worked in the B Force, and obviously worked back in the days of Lancasters and everything else, because we are still together in that we meet periodically. The last time we met was 2 years ago on our 41st anniversary of not having been together. We meet with the wives, and I think I've told you before that when we do things like that, it takes about 15 minutes, and you're back to where you were 10 years ago, and back to where we were probably 40 years ago. The crew system, it just worked because we became very good friends, and you had to be if you were going to go on the real mission.
Yeah, I would imagine so, working in close proximity like that. And of course, you've got to work as a team to make that work, haven't you?
Yes, you have, and you got to rely on each other. And I think we had a good team at the end, and as I say, we had that understanding between us.
Previously, when you were talking about you flying around the world in the Vulcan, you mentioned that there was one place that you landed at, which you actually ended up getting posted to. I believe that was in America. Is that correct?
Yes. It's a place called Offutt Air Force Base, which is in Omaha, Nebraska, or just by Omaha, Nebraska. It's the home of Strategic Air Command. Basically, there was an opportunity for crews, number one, to go to Goose Bay in Labrador to do winter training and summer training, but that was a good opportunity to fly north of the tree line, and particularly in winter when the snow was there. The actual combination of trying to fly visually and on instruments over vast areas, which is just flat, vast areas of snow covered land, was quite challenging. And the second thing the crews could do then is come down to Offutt, which is obviously in the center of America. It's 1,500 miles from either coast, so it is right in the middle of America. And from there, we used to fly around the crews used to fly around the central states. That's South Dakota, Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, Arkansas, those sort of areas. All those states are very flat, and it's simulating the steppes of Russia. Was why we were there. So the crews came down. So my detachment there was 26 on the detachment, including myself and my deputy. I had a flight lieutenant deputy, and then we had 22 of our airmen there who were actually qualified Vulcan engineers. So we handled not only the Vulcans, but if there was any other aircraft, RAF aircraft, going through staging, as we say, that out to the west coast of America, or staging right the way out to the Far East, then they came through us, and we handled the aircraft as they went through. Little did I know that when I went there, I was going to be the last detachment commander, because at that stage, we had started, in fact, giving aircraft away, and it was the demise of the aircraft, demise of the Vulcan. But the detachment, would you believe, had been there 25 years. So it is a very sad day when I had to close it. But it was a great day, and I had to arrange a big display. We had 4 Vulcans came out, one of which we left in the museum there, XH558. It's still out there. We gave it to the SAC Museum. They then subsequently built a brand new museum. Initially, it was on the airfield, but they built a brand new museum off the airfield, and they took apart all the aircraft and actually moved them. And I thought perhaps they'd leave the Vulcan behind because it's not a SAC aircraft, but they didn't. They took it apart, and there's some wonderful photographs on low loaders, and took it down the road, and it's now in the museum, in the SAC Museum on the I-80 on the interstate, or just off the interstate. Interesting enough, it was inside, and then it was moved outside, sat outside for a number of years, and in the Midwest weather, that is not good, because in the winter you can get it down to minus whatever, I don't know, 16 degrees, certainly plus 100 degrees in the summer, Fahrenheit. But then it went back inside. Well, in fact, it's inside at the moment, being refurbished. So it went in May, I think 2022, and it's still inside at the moment. So that's brilliant. So I'm very pleased that, there are a number of Vulcans around the world that are actually being conserved undercover, which is important. But as I say, the other good thing about the American tour was I had the family with me, and we all had our families there.
Yeah.
So in fact, we were just 20-odd airmen. We were actually almost 100 in number with the children and with the wives. So that was quite something when we all got together, and it was just very enjoyable from lots of points of view, from our family into it. We were able to see a lot of the states. In fact, I think we travelled around 35 states while we were there. So I've seen a fair amount of it, America as well as the world.
Yeah, definitely. And how long were you out there in America?
It was just under 2 years. Well, in fact, it was about 2 years in the end, purely because they'd had the war. They continued giving the aircraft away. We were there during the Falklands War. The story is that we'd just given an aircraft away to Castle Air Force Base Museum out in California. The reason we were giving them to various airfields was because of the SAC bombing competition, which the Vulcan used to participate in over the years, and of course that Castle was a SAC Air Force base at the time, and they had a museum. They requested an aircraft and got one. But when the Falklands happened, we went back to air-to-air refueling. My trip around the world, we never air-to-air refueled on that trip, and we didn't have to for our day-to-day bread and butter trips. We didn't require it. In fact, it was a nuisance to us because a lot of leaks had appeared in the system, and you used to get fuel coming back over the windscreen. Thank goodness we have windscreen wipers.
Yeah.
But and so they put a lot of non-return valves into the system. So once the Falklands happened, of course, they went back to air-to-air refueling, and that was something that obviously Martin Withers and the crews had to learn. Because of that, then they had to take all these non-return valves out, and also they wanted spare air-to-air refueling probes, not only as spares, but also they fitted them onto the Nimrod, because the Nimrod was also down there as a search and rescue aircraft, and that didn't have the capability of air-to-air refueling, and they used the same Vulcan probe on the Nimrod. So I had to send some of my team out to Castle to take the nose probe off the aircraft and send it back. So that's my little participation in the war, which is actually mentioned in one of the books. In fact, it's an XM607 book on one of the pages that my crew, some of my airmen went across there.
Right, fabulous stuff. So when you finished in America, did you actually think that was the end of your relationship with the Vulcan?
I did, because I ended up, I'd been in about 15 years at that stage. And in fact, I completed 32 years in the Air Force. For the next 15 years, I got involved in, I initially came back to RF Lossiemouth, which you've probably seen on the television in the Top Gun series that's running at the moment.
Yeah.
Around that, and that's including 9 Squadron, of course, my old squadron, which is now up there. So we did a tour up there in northern Scotland for 3 years. And then I got, as you do, you get sucked back. I got back to Finningley, where I ran the Domini Squadron for nav training. I then went off to Brampton and did a headquarters job. And then I went back to Finningley as OC Ops. So I did 2 tours at Finningley. In fact, the hangar where the Vulcan was originally in Hangar 3 was where my office was on both occasions. So it was great to get back as a volunteer. That was what filled the next 15 years. And eventually I went off to Staff College as well, which was at Greenwich, but that's another story. It was called JSTC, Joint Services Defence College. So I spent just under a year down at Greenwich, actually in the college itself, which is a fantastic place. And I was very lucky to get on that course. But that gave me the background to get my promotion, which, as I said, then I got promoted to Wing Commander, which was the posting back to Finningley as OC Ops. And then finally, I did a tour in Shape, a NATO tour in Belgium, Mons in Belgium, Shape, the Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, from where I left the service.
Right. So you finished your service in Belgium then, did you?
I did. Then I came back temporarily to Cranwell for a short time. as a reservist. And then eventually I flew for a couple of small airlines, and then eventually ended up flying for the Navy down at RNAS, Royal Naval Station, Cold Roads, down on the Lizard. Wow. So I flew for 41 years. Wow. I got just about 10,000 flying hours, 2,300 of those, of course, are on the Vulcan.
Which brings me nicely, of course. So, as you just mentioned there, you got 2,300 flying hours on the Vulcan itself. So when you eventually came back to Finley, having moved back up north, what was it like for you when you came back as a volunteer to the Vulcan? What were you feeling? What was your overall thoughts?
The saddest part was I've just said I was down at Cold Rose, and of course during that time the aircraft was flying again. And the sad thing was that I couldn't get involved because working down in Cornwall, it's just very difficult to get out on weekends because of the traffic, etc. And it's just too far. So that having moved back up here to Retford, I'm just within 20-25 minutes of Finley. And it was an opportunity for me to go up and see what was going on. And once I saw what was going on, I thought, well, I can help them out here with my background. It was just wonderful to, number one, to start to get involved, and then to see this enthusiasm, not only enthusiasm amongst our volunteers, but I still can't believe when the public come along and look at the aircraft, get inside the aircraft and talk about it. And that atmosphere, just their interest in the aircraft, and it's just, they all say it's a shame it's not flying now, but that's just the way of the world, and unfortunately the way it is. But despite that, they're still very interested, and as you know, when we fire the engines up as well, that is even something that they just really love and appreciate. It's just that, and I'm so glad I did it. But it's unbelievable thinking back to the fact I just made that choice to go down the Vulcan Avenue, and it's just lovely to do this on the far end of my retirement. So.
Yeah. So why do you think it's so important that the aircraft is preserved and that younger generations get to learn about it?
Besides moving forward, I think the younger generation has to look back, because we are into STEM nowadays, science, technology, and engineering and mathematics. That is the common term. We're short of engineers. We're trying to get kids and students to get involved in the engineering for the future. And I think it's important to sort of see how it was in the past, and particularly the Vulcan in its own right, because it was ahead of its time when it came out. It's got a very early fly-by-wire system and all sorts of things. And I think to appreciate the future, I think it's important to see the past. And actually, having had some students across from Sheffield University and various places, and from Doncaster itself, it's seeing their interest and seeing, the sort of questions they ask and how it was. And I think they're always very surprised at the sort of the technology that was involved in those days, because it's not way back. It's that interim period, once it's jets, it's post the war. As I say, it was a stepping stone to what we have in this day and age.
And hopefully inspire new things to come in, greener energy, etc., etc.
Absolutely, yes.
So before we go, a personal question I'd like to ask you, right? That aircraft, when she was in the sky, was the most graceful thing that I've ever seen fly. But what was she like to fly?
There's a great phrase. They say it was a joy to fly, and I think that's so true. It was quite easy to fly. In fact, flying is the basic flying. There's a few techniques you needed with the Vulcan because of the fact that it doesn't have any flaps and it doesn't have this and that. But once you got used to that and are used to the landing and the landing attitude, the rest was very straightforward. It was maneuverable. It was agile, and I think that was very well demonstrated with the Vulcan display. The fact that you could display an aircraft of that size within the airfield boundary, and also, of course, in the early days, we used to enjoy the fact that it was so maneuverable, not only down low level, but it was really low because it was built for high level, and it was really manoeuvrable up there. When we used to do fighter and fill against our lightnings and things like that we could outturn them very easily because of the large wingspan. And so in the rare air, up around 40, 50,000 feet, it was you could actually very easily outturn them. But it was, again, it was manoeuvrable. You always knew in the back of your mind that you had excess power, and I think that was important. In fact, if you had to sort of pull out quickly out of low level, for instance, when we went low level, subsequent to 1960, if you had bad weather or something you came across and you had to climb very rapidly or whatever, you always knew that just moving your right hand or left hand, whichever seat you're sitting in, then you could easily get away and climb quite rapidly out of the situation.
So not only did you have one of the most graceful aircraft, but you felt safe in her as well.
Yes, I think that's right, and I also enjoyed the crew aspect as well. I'm not a single person flying a fighter. I love the crew aspect, and from that point of view, it's very satisfying. So internally satisfying as well as externally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, excellent stuff. Adrian, thank you very much for your time. Much appreciate you talking to me.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Into the Sky. We do hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to keep looking out for more episodes on the way. And if you'd like to find out more about the work of the Vulcan to the Sky Trust, or maybe if you'd like to make a donation to help safeguard the future of XH558, please visit the website vulcantothesky.org.